4 match points.
Please.
I don't know if you heard that, but Novak Djokovic is about to serve and someone yells from the crowd, "Get vaccinated." Let's keep watching to see what happens. He's just so good. That's why he's probably the greatest tennis player of all time. He just serves an ace after some douchebag Aussie from the stands yells, "Get vaccinated." Now, why am I sharing this as a first piece of news? Well, this is becoming international news this morning. And Victoria, Australia, the people in this state that, frankly, have a few screws loose in their head, continue to embarrass us. Now, it wasn't that long ago that we actually kicked out Novak Djokovic for not being vaccinated after he came into the country for the Australian Open, which appeared to be done very legally and through the processes, but yet our whole country had a meltdown. The media, obviously the officials, the people in government, and they found ways to get rid of Novak Djokovic, right? And a lot of the people, even at that time, were like, "We're so embarrassing this nation." Like literally, our ministers in government are saying that Novak Djokovic is going to be a threat to this country because of his anti-vaccination stance and what that might ignite within the community. And now that was during the time when the government in this country was forcing everyone to get vaccinated, right? To keep their jobs, all these kind of things. They won't say they forced you. They will say that, they gave you a choice, but they used coercive methods. For instance, you couldn't leave your house, or for instance, you couldn't go to your job anymore. You couldn't attend, functions. All this kind of stuff was done during that time to push vaccination. And one of that was also you couldn't participate in sporting tournaments unless you had some sort of exemption. Now, Novak Djokovic was kicked out. A couple of years later, he came back to Australia heroically in many respects after all that crap that he's been put through. And I say heroically because Novak Djokovic is one of those athletes that never pushed this agenda down anyone's throats, right? He stuck to his guns. He said, "I'm not doing this, even if it means I'm not going to get any more titles." And he was kept out of the US for such a long time, right? He stood his ground. When many athletes, when many celebrities around the world, not just in Australia, but around the world, did not take such a stance, and they were more than happy to toe the official line and not speak from their own personal point of view or their own personal opinion. But Novak Djokovic was very strong. He came back to Australia and he won the Australian Open, right? And that in itself was epic. Now he's back again at the Australian Open, and it's a few years since that time. So why do we still have buffoons in the crowd yelling, "Get vaccinated," as some sort of slur? What vaccination do they want to take? The 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th? What booster are we up to, right? If you're down that path. And, in terms of everything else related to the vaccination program, there's a lot of questions being asked today, right? Novak Djokovic might be a bit of a Nostradamus when it comes to these regards. We have people, all sorts of mysterious things happening on the sporting fields with sports stars, with people involved in sports. Just the other day, a reporter at the Australian Open from the UK, he dropped dead. Now, I can't tell you exactly for what particular reason and what those linkages are, but he dropped dead. And you know what's poetic about this whole episode, as tragic as that guy's death is, that was someone that was telling Novak Djokovic not to turn up if he's not vaccinated. Let me just read a bit of that article as well, because there's a whole bit of there's a whole connection to this story, because this story has also gone viral overseas. Journalist who tried to cancel Novak Djokovic over not taking COVID vaccine collapses and dies while covering the Australian Open. The sports journalism community is mourning the sudden passing of Mike Dixon, a prominent figure in tennis reporting. Dixon, who is set to celebrate his 60th birthday on January 27th, died suddenly while in Melbourne for the Australian Opening. The news of his death was confirmed through a social media post by his wife and children. "We are devastated to announce that our wonderful husband and dad Mike has collapsed and died while in Melbourne for the Australian Open," read the message shared on Dixon's X account. Again, I'm not trying to make light of this guy's death. It's very tragic. I'm just comparing the way that the news is being reported on this by people looking at this from a different angle. This is what Mike Dixon wrote at one point in regards to Novak Djokovic. This is the title. "Novak Djokovic could ruin his chances of becoming the greatest of all time by refusing to take the vaccine. It is a strange hill to die on for a player who is so desperate to be loved." And then we have the title from a couple of days ago. "Daily Mail tennis correspondent Mike Dixon collapses and dies at the Australian Open." Now, it's a bit of a morbid story, and again, I don't want to make light of this guy's death because obviously there's loved ones around him and it's tragic, and we don't know exactly the circumstances of this. But all this kind of, you can see how it's all kind of interlinked. Again, Australia continues to be a bloody embarrassing nation. That buffoon on the stands is representative, I believe, of a very small minority of psychopaths that we live in our community. The pro-Dan crowd, if you're in Victoria, right? The ones that were happy to have children's playgrounds locked away. The ones that were happy to watch the police beating on grandmas for protesting during that time. It's that group of people who are talking like this and yelling these kind of things. Luckily, we heard some sanity as well. If you listen closely enough to that clip, you can hear a lady saying, "Shut the fuck up," right after that guy says, "Get vaccinated." Again, embarrassing Australia. Now, the next story that I have is around our government and this cost of living crisis. Let's see what Albanese has planned for Australia now that it's in your face. Like I've talked about this before. You can't get away from this crisis. Albanese says holiday over as Albanese recalls his MPs for urgent talks to curb inflation and cost of living pressure. Right, so they're going to come back early now, Albanese and his team. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has called Labor's MPs back to Canberra nearly 2 weeks early to discuss the cost of living crisis facing Australian households. Labor's caucus will meet in the capital on Wednesday and assess ways to ease the pressure on the household budget without adding to inflation. Ministers for Social, scrap all that. Pretty much, Labor, Anthony Albanese has made this dramatic PR call. Hey, we're all going to go back early to solve the cost of living crisis. I would have thought this guy came into government on the wings of saying that we are going to solve the cost of living crisis. Now, how long has he been in government for, and how much time has he wasted not solving the cost of living crisis? And here he is saying that we're going to come back early 2 weeks from our holiday, and this time we'll solve it, right? I think it's a PR stunt, and Craig Kelly actually pointed out some very interesting facts. This is the former MP Craig Kelly. Let's see what he wrote about this, because it's not cheap to do this, right? The panic, this is what Craig Kelly said, the panic has set in. Albanese's solution to the cost of living crisis has created a publicity stunt by flying every Labor MP, Senator into Canberra for pointless meetings. If Albanese really wanted to ease the cost of living pressure, he'd sack Blackout Bowen, so Chris Bowen, that's true. Abandon net zero. Yes, we have these green policies that, frankly, most likely are putting up our energy costs. And if we can decouple ourselves from things like net zero or the WEF agenda, which a lot of this is based on, I think that would go a long way to helping Australia's prosperity and easing the cost of living. Stop importing new immigrants. I agree, we have a housing shortage, we have a rental crisis, we don't have space for a lot of the people that are being imported into this country at the moment. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's very different if you're importing people into this country as new migrants when there's an abundance, but when we're already in this crisis, what do you think is going to happen when a couple of 100,000 people come in and exacerbate these conditions, right? That's what's going to happen. Stop wasting money on unproductive activities such as this PR stunt. Now, I think valid points from Craig Kelly. Many people watching this would share this kind of sentiment. What's going to happen? They come back 2 weeks early, they have some meeting, they do some TV PR stunt before Parliament starts again this year. And then what? A couple of months down the track, we'll still be talking about the cost of living crisis, right? It's not going to get better with these guys. If they worried about the cost of living crisis, do you think Anthony Albanese would have wasted almost a year after he got elected? All that time spent on the Voice to Parliament referendum, right? How much, not just the money would have made no difference to the crisis that we're going through right now. But the time and effort, the attention of his MPs, of the media, of everything that was happening around us, he spent his first productive time in Parliament focusing on something that didn't really eventuate and wouldn't really even help anyone in any type of situation as it relates to the problems this country is facing. So yeah, PR stunt by Anthony Albanese. The next story that I wanted to cover was around just in today generally we're going to have more pro-Palestine protests, and obviously this has been going on now for weeks and weeks, and the situation ebbs and flows, and there's a lot of still growing community discontent around this issue. Now, I won't be able to attend the protest this week because unfortunately I will be at an event attending work, but these protests, they've spilled out into these weekly, almost daily sometimes, protests against shipping companies in Australia. So at the docks, against Sim Shipping at the Webb docks, there's been a protest that's been going on there for about, I think, 2 days. They've been holding a picket line blocking access to workers and people, refusing to cross the picket line and so forth. So that's been happening, and that's adding obviously other frustrations to to the workers there, potentially the companies that are involved in that, and as well as deliveries. Now they're saying that this is stifling these deliveries by Israeli linked Zim shipping company, but obviously, how long can this go on? Now, today's protest, there'll be Clementine Ford and a few other writers there as well, talking about the treatment of that ABC journalist I've discussed previously, Antoinette Lattouf, and her firing, sacking from ABC, which is now in the middle of a court case. So Clementine Ford will be speaking there. I'll follow up on this story in the coming days after we see what transpires there. In the actual conflict itself, you're seeing Israel losing a lot of friends around the world in terms of the pressure that's being exerted on them to have a ceasefire, have some sort of negotiations with Hamas, it appears. That's what people are saying. Let me know your thoughts on that and how this is all transpiring. We have seen Israel now taking this a bit more regional. They've been bombing targets in Lebanon as well as in Syria. When I say targets, they've been targeting leaders of the Iranian regime mostly, and leaders of Hezbollah in some capacity, military leaders. And they've been successful in those targets, which have said, now Iran's come out and said there'll be repercussions. Same thing, Hezbollah saying similar things around this. We have the Houthis with their back and forth with the Biden administration with cargo ships and shipping lanes, and Biden bombing them. And Biden's come out and said, well, it's not really working. They're not really stopping, but we're going to keep bombing them. So that's happening as well. Pakistan bombed Iran. Iran bombed Pakistan. Again, they're bombing militant targets in each country. A lot of people put a lot into that, what was happening there. I think that's going to diffuse itself, because that seems unrelated to the larger conflict that we're seeing, and it's more of a territorial issue with militants operating within those regions. And because Iran bombed Pakistan and took out some militants, Pakistan responded by doing that as well. I think it's more of like just showing face and saying, like, if you're going to bomb us in our territory, we can bomb in your territory without your permission. Let me know about all this stuff that's going around with foreign policy if you guys have any thoughts. I would love to distill some of this stuff in the coming episodes down the track. As for today, guys, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Enjoy it with your family and your friends. There's a lot of chaos and nonsense going on around us, but try to make the most of every day that you can. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.